I think this main topic would be also a little bit of interest and useful for us. And this is prophetic calling of Ellen White and her role in defining the Adventist pillars of faith. And I would like to start with this story about soldiers' faith, which is recorded by Uriah Smith in Adventist Review, in Review and Herald magazine, which was printed in October 4, 1864 issue. And the story is, though this is short story, I think I will, that's the complete story in blue. It's not long, but possibly you will be able to read it through later on. I will post it on my website and I will provide you with link. In few words, it happened during the time of Napoleon I. Napoleon, the Emperor of France, was riding horse, and somehow he left his tribe just there unattended. And in a moment, horse went running. And without holding anything, without having reaching that strap, the Napoleon was in great danger. In this moment, a soldier saw that. He immediately ran across, he grasped the horse, he stopped it, and handed the strap to the Napoleon. And Napoleon thanked him, and he said, and it's written here, "Much obliged to you, Captain," said Napoleon. So it was soldier. Napoleon knew exactly who was there, but he turned to him, calling him Captain. So the man immediately believed the chief and said, "Of what regime, sir? If you called me Captain, then give me the place of my service as Captain." And Napoleon, delighted with his quick perception and ready trust in his word, replied, "Of my guards." And he rode away. So what did that soldier? He didn't wait for another chance. He didn't wait for any specific call and appointment and whatever. As he was in his regular soldier's uniform, he left whatever he had there and he went and joined officers. And the officers turned to themselves and say, "And who is there? Why are you here?" And he said, "I am the captain of the guardians of Napoleon." "Well, who say that you are?" And the soldier says, "He said," and pointed to the emperor who was still visible there. So everyone said, "Oh, if that's his order, then okay." And the idea behind this story, which was written here, I highlighted this with yellow. The soldier had faith in emperor's word. It was that which brought him to his promotion. Or for all men to have as much faith in God as they have in man. The Lord says, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." Sinners, why not then immediately believe and be baptized? Why do you wait? Oh, you look at the subject from your own weak and worldly and selfishly biased reason and not from faith. Why not stop and believe and act with no delay? It is the way for you to be saved. So, you see, sometimes this is the problem, that we are not trusting God immediately when God says. Sometimes we delays. You know, I had my own story, similar story, but with different ending. I was working as an accountant, and one day my chief officer called me and said, you know, I want you to become chief financial officer of publishing house which is nearby. And he was the head of that publishing house, and he was the head of my office as well. And I said, well, I could do that. So he said, okay, so just do it. Well, what should I do? I knew that in approximately a month, there's supposed to be the governing committee board, and I was expecting that he will appoint me during that board. So I was continuing to do my duties. I went to that publishing. I looked at what was there. I just asked for some papers to see what is there. But you know, I was not acting as a chief financial officer there. I was waiting. And when the time of that board came, another person was appointed. And I was told by that person, you know, I decided that you don't want that position because you didn't accept it right away. So this is the situation. Here's another comment of some kind of Dr. Malan in commenting on the foregoing anecdote. That's how he called this story about the soldier and Napoleon. As he, the soldier, believed himself to be a captain before wearing his uniform, so on the word and promise of God, one believes himself to be a child of Jesus before being sanctified by his Spirit. We might not be sanctified by the Spirit of God yet, but we are children of God today. And Apostle John, in first epistle, in chapter 3, starts from these words. We do not know what will be when it will be revealed, but we know for sure that today we are the children of God. And that's the greatest love revealed to us by God. Okay, about how Ellen White received her position in the church as the messenger of the Lord. If you will look at the church history, you will find that at least two more Millerites claimed to have visions prior to Ellen White. It was William Ellis Foy, and Hazen Foss, two gentlemen. Second one, Hazen Foss, he was brother-in-law of Ellen White, relative. And though William Foy received 4 visions and he published those visions in year 1845, but he rejected possibility to go, travel, and preach about what God revealed to him. Hazen Foss even didn't want to speak about this, and he recognized that Ellen White received the same vision only later on, when he, being in another room from where Ellen White was sitting and presenting to people her vision, he said later on, yes, I saw exactly the same, but I rejected. I was afraid. So what happened? These two gentlemen, they received a message from Lord. They received some authority from God to go and proclaim, but they hesitated to do that. What happened to Ellen Harmon at that moment? Well, before that, I would like to mention Hiram Edson. Also, he received vision of heavenly sanctuary, and we will be talking about this a little bit later. But he's also among those first visionaries of I would say Adventism, not necessarily Seventh-day Adventists, because neither William Foy nor Hazen Foss became Seventh-day Adventists. But let's talk about Ellen Harmon at that moment. In December 1844, she saw that first vision, which was in the house of the friends of Mrs. Hines on Ocean Street in South Portland in Maine, state of Maine. And Ellen White recalled all that, and she was writing this, that at this time I visited one of our Advent sisters, and in the morning we bowed around the family altar. It was not an exciting occasion, and there were but few of us present, all females. While praying, the power of God came upon me as I never had felt it before, and I was wrapped up in a vision of God's glory, and seemed to be rising higher and higher from the earth, and was shown something of the travels of the Advent people to the holy city. And we know this as vision of narrow path. This was given to support those passing through that great disappointment, those people. Similar vision was given to William Foy and Hazen Foss to encourage. And those visions were given to them before the great disappointment in order to help them to understand that they are on the right way, though the second coming of Jesus will be later than they expected. So Ellen White saw that. Here was that vision. And of course, she shared this with those ladies with whom she was in that room. But usually we know that second vision of Ellen White was in February of next year, 1845. Usually they say that second vision was connected to sanctuary. But very rare, some recognize that second vision was, as it's written here, about a week later after the first one. Because second vision was given exclusively to Ellen Harmon herself. She was writing this in Life Sketches, that's page 69. The Lord gave me a view of the trials through which I must pass, and told me that I must go and relate to others what he had revealed to me. It was shown me that my labors would meet with great opposition, and that my heart would be rent with anguish, but that the grace of God would be sufficient to sustain me through all. So you see, just like previous two men received visions and after that were charged by God to go and preach, and I believe those people received the same words as well, that their labor will meet great opposition and hardship and everything, whatever is possible. So they retreated. She was writing, for several days and far into the night, I prayed that this burden might be removed from me and laid upon someone more capable of bearing it. So Ellen White was also shaking on that. And there is, if you will take this book, Life Sketches, and you will read these several pages, you will find what happened later. And there was encouragement from the brethren. The company of believers in Portland were ignorant concerning the exercises of my mind that had brought me into this state of despondency. But they knew that for some reason my mind had become depressed, and they felt that this was sinful on my part, considering the gracious manner in which the Lord has manifested himself to me. So it was meeting, and these people wanted to pray about Ellen Harmon at that time. And she's writing after that. While prayer was offered for me, that the Lord would give me the strength and courage to bear the message, the thick darkness that had encompassed me rolled back, and a sudden light came upon me. And that light, it was something that seemed to me like a ball of fire, struck me right over the heart. My strength was taken away, and I fell to the floor. I seemed to be in the presence of the angels. One of these holy beings again repeated the words, "Make known to others what I have revealed to you." And there was Father Pearson, one elderly minister of Millerites, who could not kneel on account of his rheumatism. He witnessed this occurrence. When I revived sufficiently to see and hear, he rose from his chair and said, "I have seen a sight such as I never expected to see. A ball of fire came down from heaven and struck Sister Ellen Harmon right in on the heart. I saw it. I saw it. I can never forget it. It has changed my whole being. Sister Ellen, have courage in the Lord. After this night, I will never doubt again. We will help you henceforth and not discourage you." So you can imagine, it was not easy to this 17-year-old girl who was, beside everything else, with poor health, with lack of education. It was hard for her to accept this responsibility. As you can see, for several days and nights, she was struggling. Nevertheless, she accepted it. So that's how everything started. When she accepted it, it was not easy. There was some opposition, some rejection, but God kept his promise. God always was on her side. So, the first question, how she was introduced into this ministry, is here. Now, the second question is what was the relationship of Ellen White toward doctrines of our church which we have. And this is, I would say that Ellen White never established any new doctrines. She was never the first to present any new doctrine. She was just supported those which was revealed through Bible study, and sometimes helped to correct if those discussions were not right, and sometimes to help to see the better option among those which they saw. There are 3 points average, though some researchers, some historians of the church, they say that there was difference of what role Ellen White held or played before 1850 and after 1850. But more or less together, everything what she did first is to confirm biblically correct conclusions arrived at through prayer, diligent study of the word, and fasting. So other people were studying Bible, and they were coming to certain conclusions, which might be sometimes sounded strange, sounded maybe unusual, sounded new, and not always they were so courageous to accept them. And God, through Ellen White, was supporting, confirming those correct conclusions. Second, those visions of Ellen White were to correct when they were wrong. So sometimes those conclusions were not that good. Sometimes they were slipping away from the truth. So after they discussed many different things, God was providing revelation which would correct and provide the right answer to whatever they studied. And the third, to suggest new initiatives, new directions for further fruitful discovery when at an impasse. So you see, it was not providing just as on a plate, here it is, just get and enjoy. No, it was just direction, just initiative, but you supposed to discover by yourself. That was the action, how it was. And even talking about the main doctrine which made Seventh-day Adventist Church as it is right now, it's the sanctuary doctrine. Though the second vision of Ellen White was vision of the sanctuary, but she was not the first who presented this doctrine, this idea, because it was Hiram Edson who received that vision at the beginning, and that's him who presented this, and together with other brethren, with Crozier, with Hahn, 3 of them, they studied the sanctuary doctrine, and they presented to brethren, to those Millerites, and those who accepted, studied more. And this was, that vision of Hiram Edson happened next morning on October 23, 1844, and Ellen White received support, her second vision for public, third vision altogether, which was about sanctuary. It was only in February 1845. So it was, as we can see, 4 to 5 months later. It was to support the finding what people already received by their studies. So this in February 1845, Ellen White allegedly experienced her second vision in Exeter, in Maine. It was known as bridegroom vision. So That was that experience, that vision which placed foundation for Seventh-day Adventist belief. Now, here I would like to present another thing, another way how Ellen White worked with the doctrines of the church. Take a look at this picture. This is the way of life, from paradise lost to paradise restored. Some of you might know this picture well, possibly even the story of this picture. This is not the first one, this second one. The first one was presented by Kellogg, brother of John Kellogg, younger brother. He presented a first picture like this. It was almost similar, just few minor details. This one, Kellogg presented his picture in 1876. Yes? No, in 1873. In 1873, Kellogg presented his picture, but after that, James White decided to correct few details, and this is version of James White. Almost the same. You could see here the story of sin, of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. After that, you could see the story of Cain and Abel. After that, you could see the sacrifice with high priest there, and the tree with 10 commandments hanging from 2 branches. One branch has another 4 smaller branches, and second branch has 6 smaller branches. So this is exactly like this tree is the law of God, which is supposed to be there. Then Jesus Christ at the cross, and all that sin was in the shadow of the cross. And here you could see Jesus with disciples at the Last Supper. There you could see John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, and then you could see the path through some ground toward the shining New Jerusalem, the hope of second coming of Jesus. That's the way of life from paradise lost to paradise restored. This one was presented in 1876 by James White. And it reflected more or less the hope of Adventists. But I would like to show you another picture. I believe that you remember the details of this one. And now let's look at another one. It's entitled Christ, the Way of Life. And if you will look at this picture, you will see mainly the same scenes here, though the only one difference. You could see Adam and Eve driven out of this Garden of Eden. You could see again in the shadow of cross Cain and Abel. You could see that priest and the sacrifice for the sin. You could see Jesus Christ. You could see disciples at the Last Supper. You could see the same baptism of Jesus in the river of Jordan. You could see New Jerusalem, which is coming there. The only one thing, on the way to the New Jerusalem, you could see the mountain, which you need to go through that. The only difference is no 10 commandments. Instead of 10 commandments, which was in the center of this picture, you could see there on the back, on the farmost back, Mount Sinai. That's where you have 10 commandments. And this picture was presented by Ellen White in 1883. Many Adventists believe that righteousness by faith was preached only in 1888 at Minneapolis. But when that happened, Ellen White told that this was the message which she was preaching always. And it was in 1883, 5 years prior to Minneapolis Conference, when Ellen White decided to correct the picture which was presented first by Kellogg and second by her husband, James White. And she corrected in such a way, removing Ten Commandments and placing Jesus, cross of Jesus, in front. That's how she tried visually to present to Seventh-day Adventist Church this better, more exact concept of salvation. So it's, such kind of visualized idea how Ellen White was doing with bringing doctrines into the church. I could go from doctrine to doctrine discussing different things, what was done by Ellen White. But I would like to just to read something like summary of what Ellen White wrote after the Minneapolis Conference, because some suggested that in Minneapolis there were introduced new doctrines. And Ellen White wrote this, and I quote from Counsels to Writers and Editors, pages 30 and 31. In Minneapolis, God gave precise gems of truth to his people in new settings. This light from heaven by some was rejected. With all the stubbornness, the Jews manifested in rejecting Christ. And there was much talk about standing by the old landmarks. But there was evidence they knew not what the old marks were. So you see, some people were trying to say that in Minneapolis, those two young preachers wanted to move old landmarks, old foundations of faith. But Ellen White says they simply didn't know what those old marks were. So there was evidence and there was reasoning from the word that commended itself to the conscious. But the minds of men were fixed, sealed against the entrance of light, because they had decided it was a dangerous error removing the old landmarks, when it was not moving a peg of the old landmarks. But they had perverted ideas of what constitute the old landmarks. And then just look what Ellen White writes after this. The passing of the time in 1844 was a period of great events, opening to our astonished eyes the cleansing of the sanctuary transpiring in heaven, and having decided relation to God's people upon the earth. Also the first and second angel's message, and the third unfurling the banner on which was inscribed the commandments of God, the faith of Jesus. One of the landmarks under this message was the temple of God seen by his truth-loving people in heaven, and their ark containing the law of God. The light of Sabbath of the fourth commandment flashed in strong rays in the pathway of the transgressors of God's law. The non-immortality of the wicked is an old landmark. I can call to mind nothing more than can come under the head of the old landmarks. All this cry about changing the old landmarks is all imaginary. So do you see what is here? Ellen White listed here basic foundational doctrines of Seventh-day Adventist Church. Those old landmarks. And here they are. The second coming of Jesus, which is based on 1844, that means on the prophecy of Daniel and Revelation. That's one. Second, the heavenly sanctuary, including Christ's high priestly ministry there. Third, soul sleep, conditional immortality, and non-immortality of the wicked. Fourth, the seventh-day Sabbath and the immutability of the Ten Commandments. And the fifth, the three angels' message. That's all. That's our old landmarks on which we stand. These should not be moved whatsoever. All the rest doctrines which we have are secondary toward this. All the rest doctrines which we have, even if they came or were accepted earlier, prior to this time, like the same, what I would like to say, the doctrine on health reform. Health reform was introduced in 1863, and here it was written in 1889, and health reform you cannot see among our landmarks. So what does it mean? That means that these particular 5 doctrines, these are not movable. These are basic. That's our foundation on which we stand, and we cannot step out of this foundation. All the rest doctrines which we have are secondary to these, and we can elaborate on those. We can have, these doctrines as well, we can have greater light on these, and of course we do have greater light on all of these doctrines, but this new light would never change whatever we have in old light, in previous time. Other doctrines that could be developed and more clarified and so on. Even you cannot see here doctrine about God. You cannot see here doctrine about Bible, whatever we discussed today. So just this, and Ellen White said, I can call to mind nothing more that can come under the head of the old landmarks. Okay? That's what we need to understand. Though there are many more doctrines which our church has. So, just talking less about this, I would like to present it and say that's what Ellen White did for doctrinal stand of our church. Beside of the doctrines itself, I wanted to bring up another issue connected to our church is organizational structure. And here I would like to recall a few words from the first chapter of Ellen White biography, which we have, there is 6-volume biography of Ellen White. And from the very first volume, from very first chapter, it's like this. There is described the situation. In Old Battle Creek, on Tuesday morning in April, hundreds had gathered at the tabernacle for the opening meeting of a general conference session. It was 1901. After the usual formalities, the president closed his opening address, surrendered the office that he had held for 2 years, and declared, "The conference is now formally opened. What is your pleasure?" A little woman in advancing years, arose from one of the seats on the floor, pressed to the front, mounted the steps to the platform, and moved to the desk to speak to the large audience. She had something to say, and she felt that now was the time to say it. After describing the great privilege of the Advent people to stand high above the world, sanctified by the truth and having a close connection with heaven, she came quickly to the burden of her heart, the quality and fitness of those who serve in the cause of God, and especially those who lead. She declared, "Every soul in every conference, in every part of the Lord's vineyard, has the privilege of knowing the truth. But truth is not truth to those who do not practice it. Truth is only truth to you when you live it in daily life, showing the world what those people must be who are at last saved." Then, addressing particularly to leaders of the General Conference, she pointed out the damaging impact on a rapidly growing church of restrictive policies imposed by a very small group of people struggling to manage a work that had grown far beyond their ability to handle. "You have no right to manage," she declared, "unless you manage in God's order." She then cried out, "What we want now is reorganization. We want to begin at the foundation and to build upon a different principle. There are to be more than one or two or three men to consider the whole vast field. The work is greater, and there is no one human mind that can plan for the work which needs to be done." Her message became that pivot point which changed our organization completely. Before 1901, there was one general conference and all the rest conference throughout the world. And here they created unions. They elected many more people who would be leaders, local leaders in the world, who would manage the work from their local fields. So organization changed, and that gave new life to the church. So Ellen White was not only standing for the doctrine, but Ellen White was presenting some new ideas for the structure of church organization. Well, she was doing a lot more things, but I would like to stress on these two things what she was doing. And possibly at the end, what I would like to quote again from the same first volume of biographical books. At the farewell meeting, many joined Loughborough, who was present during the organization of General Conference 38 years before, in the expression, "I thank God for what I have seen here in this work of reorganization during this conference." And in her closing remarks, Ellen White asked the question, "Who do you suppose has been among us since this conference began? Who has walked up and down the aisles of this tabernacle?" And she answered, "The God of heaven and his angels," and added, "We have been trying to organize the work on right lines. The Lord has sent his angels to minister unto us who are heirs of salvation, telling us how to carry the work toward how to carry the work forward. Press together, and let us be united in Christ." So that's what was ministry of Ellen White, how it started, how it continued, and in a few words, the main things what she did. And after this, I wanted to finish with this quotation of Desire of Ages, which I started at the beginning. And in that paragraph, I highlighted two sentences. First, I didn't read, this prophecy will again be fulfilled. The prophecy when, in the prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction, Christ said, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. This prophecy will again be fulfilled. The abandoning in iniquity of that day finds its counterpart in this generation. And then she continues to whatever I started at the beginning. By giving the gospel to the world, it is in our power to hasten our Lord's return. We are not only to look for, but to hasten the coming of the day of God. Had the Church of Christ done her appointed work as the Lord ordained, would before this have been warned, and the Lord Jesus would have come to our earth in power and great glory. Now we are in the latest days. I believe that the number of saved, those who are supposed to fill in the New Jerusalem, is coming to its completion. And very soon we'll be facing those last events. But it depends from us. Are we ready? Are we those people who are supposed to keep our love and our ministry and whatever we have to witness in ourselves our Lord God, His character, His gospel? So He is coming soon, so He could accomplish our earthly history. That's the message which I found for today.
Thank you very much, Brother Vasily, for this wonderful message. Are you open to take a few questions from the participants and the online congregation?
Yes, I am open. I'm looking that we already 2 hours and 2 minutes on my recording. But if it's not hard for you.
Yeah.
Yes, Brother Johanna. Maybe we'll take 4 or 5 questions only, but let's start with Brother Johanna, Elder Johanna.
Yeah, basically, I have 2 questions, which it could be one, but I will ask in 2 ways. Number 1, what do you think is the reason behind the resurrection of Desmond Ford among our theologians today? And also, again, another question which could be the similar. Among our theologians today, there is a movement of relegating Ellen White really from the. So, what do you think could be the reason? With regard to Desmond Ford, do you think the church didn't, when Desmond Ford started in the 80s, did the church make any mistakes in the way they dealt with him?
Okay. Possibly I will start from relation towards Ellen White and Spirit of Prophecy. And Ellen White say that it would be like a sign of latest events when the Spirit of Prophecy, when testimonies will not be accepted. And when I see that many not only church members and theologians, but even pastors are rejecting or taking lightly spirit of prophecy, well, it's hard, it's painful, but that's another sign that we are close to the end. Also, another sign of the end, and Ellen White was telling us that at the end of time, Satan will try to confuse people of God by introducing hundreds of different erroneous ideas. And today, if you will look around, you could see a lot of those, you could list dozens of those ideas on Trinity, and I counted some 20 different ideas on Trinity. There would be on Daniel and Revelation. There would be on this lunar Sabbath. There is this flat Earth. There are some others. So you just mention any strange ideas. They are coming into among Seventh-day Adventists as well. And the idea of Desmond Ford, it's not new one. In fact, it was introduced still in that days of Reformation when first studies of Daniel and Revelation started, and Revelation was studied all the way, but Daniel was studied only at the end of time, and we understand that was just now I'm trying to recall his name, one friend of Isaac Newton, Andreas Helvig, if I believe right. He was the first who published, in fact, he wrote, and Isaac Newton published his work on Antichrist and 666 meaning. So starting from that time, when they began to look at the prophecy, and after that later, when they start to find that Daniel is talking about papacy, then Catholic Church developed two different opposite strategies to counterfeit the truth. We usually interpret prophecy of Daniel and Revelation in historical way. And the Catholic Church introduced right away two different ways. One which is called preterist, which says that everything happened long ago and not relevant to these days. And another is futurist, which is, they say, yes, it will be something like this, but only far away, sometime later on. So these ideas were introduced in order to confuse people. So now they have three different ideas and try to choose the best one. So first idea, preterist idea, that little horn of fourth beast was said as it was Antioch Epiphanes. And they try to present, look, everything fits there much better than this Catholic Church, which doesn't have to do with anything with the temple and so on. And many theologians in the world, and unfortunately some among Seventh-day Adventists, just caught by that idea. I know several pastors in our church in these days. They were, some of them already step away from or were taken away from the pastoring ministry. Some others still struggling with this, asking the question about Antiochus Epiphanes, if he is that small horn. That was the problem of Desmond Ford. His problem started when he began to study Daniel 8:14, looking at the cleansing of the sanctuary, which is cleansing of the sanctuary translated from Septuagint, from Greek, but in Hebrew means to make righteous sanctuary. That in that time sanctuary will be righteous, made righteous. And because of that, just looking at that one word, and that's the problem of many scientists, many theologists, when they are so pointed to one word, to one phrase, that they don't see everything around them. And because he looked at that and he couldn't see cleansing of the sanctuary, though Septuagint translated exactly about cleansing of the sanctuary, the same word which was in Leviticus telling that it's cleansing of the sanctuary. Nevertheless, he decided that those Greek translators were not right, and he knows better, and he began to destroy the main teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on what's supposed to happen at the end of 2,300 years. And starting with that, he went on and he adopted that idea of Antiochus instead of papacy. That's all. Now, what Seventh-day Adventist Church supposed to do in this situation? We already passed through these 5 doctrines which cannot be moved. We cannot step off that platform of our doctrines. Otherwise, we will lose ourselves as Seventh-day Adventists. And among those was Ellen White stated 1844, second coming of Jesus and sanctuary, cleansing of the sanctuary, ministering of Jesus Christ, and second department of the heavenly sanctuary. That's what Seventh-day Adventists stand on. That's doctrine number 1. You can have everything else, but this one, you cannot call yourself Seventh-day Adventist. Because any other doctrine you can find in at least 2 of other denominations in the world. But this one, well, you could find it among Reformed movement of Seventh-day Adventists, but these are also Seventh-day Adventists. Not any other denomination have teaching about sanctuary. So Desmond Ford, however good, however sincere, however perfect in everything else he would be, he could not teach anything more because the basic foundation he rejected. So Seventh-day Adventist Church was right toward him that Seventh-day Adventist Church took off him the right to teach at the seminary, took off from him the right to be pastor in the church, but his church membership was retaining for, I believe, some 20 years longer. And it was a few years before his death, he withdrew his membership by himself and he joined Seventh-day Baptists. But it was his own decision. Okay?
Thank you.
Maybe one more question.
Whatever you rule.
And perhaps this is the last one because we need to allow some time before the meeting, the prayer meeting tonight.
If you raise your hand, if I can't see. Any more questions? I don't think there are any more questions, Brother Vasily. So I think with that, we want to give you a lot of thanks for this time that you shared with us today. There's a lot of very valuable information, and we thank you for firstly answering the two large questions at the start, and then sharing this information about the ministry of Ellen White. Very crucial to our understanding. So again, thank you from all of us who attended this afternoon.